And today I'm very excited to introduce an adult who lives with SMA and who is also a patient advocate. This is Fiona Tolich from New Zealand. She's an advocate of SMA in New Zealand and a trustee with Patient Voice Aotearoa. Fiona, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I just want to thank you so very much for the opportunity to share the situation about New Zealanders living with SMA by inviting both myself but Rare Disorders New Zealand. I wanted to share my journey in the hope that you can understand the challenges that patients face and in the hope that you can help moving forward to understand what it is like. I have 5 key points to make today. Firstly, children who are diagnosed at newborn screening and pre-symptomatically would have over a 70% chance of showing no clinical sign of the disease at all if treated. In New Zealand, we have an amazing newborn screening program, but we do not screen for SMA because we do not treat it. So New Zealanders do not have funded access to any treatment at all, nothing. Our children are diagnosed only after the disease has taken hold, and they are monitored simply for deterioration because our clinicians' hands are tied. The average age of death for the most common type of SMA in New Zealand is 13 months old, whereas these same children are thriving just across the Tasman. My second point is to give you a bit of a timeline of understanding. It wasn't until 2018 that an application was made to both the New Zealand and Australian governments to fund the first therapy, Spinraza. Children in Australia got access that same year and now have more treatment options available. Whereas in New Zealand, as you have heard, we still have nothing. We have a 2-tier health system when it comes to medicines access. If you cannot afford to pay the list price for an unfunded medicine, then you cannot access it. If you manage to access it, you then have to pay to administer it and cover all of those costs in the public health system. You need to be wealthy on not just a domestic scale, but on a world scale to be able to afford treatments for rare disorders, because as you know, they are not cheap. Around 25% of New Zealand children with SMA have had to flee like medical refugees to countries like Australia and Canada, for some moving in the middle of a global pandemic with no knowledge of when or if they would see their family again. Families are torn apart and lose their sense of belonging and support, and the rest are stuck in a system where families are told to go home, take photos, and make memories. My third point is that in May last year, I took a case to the Human Rights Commission in New Zealand. I had been fighting for 5 years, using every democratic avenue that was open to me, and I got nowhere. As you know, every day counts with SMA, as each day is the potential for another motor neuron to be lost. That might be the ability to sit, to stand, to swallow, or even breathe. A key point in my case, which is important to understand, is that children with cancer in New Zealand can access any treatment that their specialist prescribes, funded or not, recommended or not, for free, regardless of the price. New Zealand boasts world-leading health outcomes for children with cancer, which is absolutely fantastic, but not for SMA. This community suffers horrendous and preventable health outcomes. So why is a child with a rare cancer worth saving, but a child with a rare genetic condition like SMA not? They are both worth saving. Perversely, as a result of my case, New Zealand's Medicines Buying Agency initiated a review of paediatric oncology medicine funding, threatening to limit the treatments available for children with cancer. A devastating decision when all I wanted was to save the children and lives of those suffering from SMA. The focus must be on the highest attainable health outcome for all children and all adults, regardless of their condition. During my case, I sat at a table with a human rights lawyer who said that my case was legitimate, but in New Zealand, the Human Rights Commission does not have the power to act over the government, so they have no teeth in the fight for human rights. With no power and no other avenue left onshore, my next step was to take this to New York and the United Nations. And here I am, thanks to some wonderful people, including Sergei Kaislaitzia and everyone involved. I honestly cannot thank you enough. My fourth point is a short one, which is investment. Successive governments have failed to see the importance of investing in early treatment and cures, where we would be better positioned to fight diseases and conditions, as the lovely families before me have shown. Our investment is so low that we do not even make OECD tables anymore. Knowing that there are treatments available in poorer countries than ours is really tough to understand. I cannot help, and this is tough, but think, are the genetically compromised people like me and these amazing kids in New Zealand not worth it? Finally, my last point that I want to make is that we need a system that values all lives. We need a system that does not discriminate based on the condition that you were born with. We need a system that uses a full societal evaluation when making funding decisions to take into consideration the full value of a medicine. That's looking at indirect costs like housing, vehicle modifications, the cost of caregivers, the lost productivity of patients, people like me that might one day lose the ability to work and contribute to my economy, or their caregivers that are taken out of the workforce, and increased support that might be needed in the education system. But most of all, UN members, states like New Zealand must follow the international conventions that we have signed up to. We must have a framework so that people who are already in the fight for their life do not need to expose themselves so publicly and beg in their darkest hours with no political support. In closing, in 2018, Catalina Devandes, the former UN Special Rapporteur for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, presented a report to the UN General Assembly, and it called for states to develop and implement policies and practices to improve equity in terms of access to care. With world leaders and diplomats within the United Nations willing to help those countries that are so far behind, I believe that we can get there. I am fighting, and like Imagine Dragons, I am a believer, and I long for the day that I can be proud to report back to you here and say that New Zealand has made it too. Thank you very much.
Fiona, thank you so much for your passionate speech, and we are really with you, and we really hope that all the patients of New Zealand will have access to treatment very soon.